My name is Carl Quo, and this is Founder Quest, a podcast about the journeys of starting a game studio. Today's guest, Ben Carcich of Building Better Games, is a bit different than our normal. He's a production and leadership consultant in games who got started on this path after leaving Riot Games in 2020. He shares what led to this journey of choosing to go into consulting rather than development, and what he's learned along the way. We talk about how many of the challenges are similar to other founding journeys we've talked about. It was a fascinating look about how things that can look very different on the outside can share many things in common about the journey. Let's jump in. The place that I always start, and the question I always kind of ask first to kick us off, is there was some moment where you went from maybe I'll start a thing to no, I'm definitely starting something. And like you become emotionally or mentally committed to the idea. And then that starts a whole chain of like stuff, right? But leading up to that moment, how did you approach it? How were you thinking about it? And what sort of tipped you over the edge from like, maybe I'll do something to, nope, we're doing this?
All right. So I was at Riot, and last role I had there was in discipline development. I was in the production discipline space, particularly focused on the more operational side of the production discipline. But prior to that, I'd been making games and parts of games and platforms that support games. And, I did some R&D with Valorant, and I did a lot of different stuff on League, from like back-end tech teams, tools to content creation right up front. And I'd shifted over time to realize that more and more and more, I wasn't as worried about what I was doing. I cared about the team I worked with. And it's funny because you actually picked this up in my interview, I think in 2011. Yeah, a long time ago. Because you were one of the people, like you were my first manager at the company. And it was this, like I have opinions about products, but I really would prefer that someone else do that. Like, and it's not I can't, I've done it. I did some of it. And some people were like, you're really good at it. And I'm like, I don't really think that's true, but thank you. But I don't really enjoy it that much. I'll give you my opinions, but what I do have strong opinions on is other people. And over time, even that developed. And I realized that so much of what I valued about what I could bring to any space was how do I level up the leaders? Because when I look back at my life, leadership is the through line, going all the way back to like the Boy Scouts, but then in the military and then at Riot as a producer, like leadership was just this thing that I didn't realize that I spent a lot more time thinking about than the average person that was, a producer at a games company. So that's why I ended up in the discipline development space. And I was trying to figure out, okay, cool, how do we train people? How do we make these leaders better? And Riot kept asking me, kind of like from the side, like, oh, hey, do you want to go back and like help us ship this thing? Do you want to, hey, we got a role, it's someone your shape. Like, do you want to go? And part of me is like, that makes so much sense. I think for like, there was a brief period where I was kind of annoyed. And then I was like, no, what? It's a video game company. They make games and parts of games and things that support games. Of course they want me, who they know at whatever level they're asking, right? Like, can go help them make games. Go help make games, please. That's what we do. And I realized that they were kind enough to allow me to do that discipline development. And it's not to say they didn't value it, but to use like the analogy I like to use is I think a lot of those large companies, they value the development of the disciplines and the leaders in the same way that we all care about starving children in the third world. It is good to care about that. We want to be aware of it. But when push comes to shove, are you going to put a lot of time and resources behind it? And for most people, the answer is no. And it's easy to get mad at everybody for that. And again, I don't. It's just like, look, you're a game company. You make games. Like, yeah, you make some great games. Like, League of Legends is a great game. Valorant's great. TFT, oh my gosh, like, these are great games. And to also be fair to Riot, like they actually did a lot more than most companies do around leadership development and training and things like that. I wanted to push that further. And I realized that the Venn diagram of what I wanted to do and what Riot wanted me to do no longer overlapped. And so then this question emerges like, well, wait, then what do I do? Because I think I'm literally in one of the companies that is most forward in some of these areas. And if I really want to help leaders lead better, and I see that as a huge opportunity in game development. Because if even a place like Riot, that again actually focused an above average amount of time and energy into this, was struggling here, what about all the other companies? What about the leaders out there? I thought about myself in 2011 showing up to Riot and asking people, what should I read? What do I study? Where's like the handbook of game production? And no one had anything like that. They had, go read some Mike Cohn. Hey, check out this book over here. There's this other thing, a lot of stuff pulled from agility and software development. And in the 8 years I was there, I didn't see that change very much. So could I go and start trying to produce some content, try to help the leaders, try to improve things? And that was when I sort of made the call, like, I don't think I want to go back into a studio and help them ship something somewhere else. And also I appreciate Riot giving me the opportunity to try to do what I'm doing. But the reality is that like when I actually push forward, I don't think I'm going to get a lot of support. And I'm seeing that with some of the people around me that are trying to do the same thing. And so let me go try to do this. And that was kind of the genesis of like, all right, well, then the next thing is going to be me doing consulting, I guess, or training or coaching or something like that. And I also did get a coactive coaching certification. Like I'm a fully certified, whatever, CPCC. That was not a small investment of money and time. That was actually pretty cool. And that was also focused in that space of like, it's really about how do you coach people well. But for me, I look at it through that lens of, wow, the thing I love doing the most is helping other leaders just like find their feet and excel. There's so many leaders out there that don't know what to do and they know that they're not doing the best job they could be doing. We should all be like that to some extent, but they don't know where to go. They don't know what the thing that they could try is. And I often joke that many of the people I managed were so much more willing to do challenging things than I was when I was in their shoes. And partially that's because they were just go-getters in ways I wasn't. But part of it might have also been that like I pushed them towards that and I let them see the options. They're like, hey, you could try this. You could do that. And sometimes they come back and be like, I did it. It went really well. And I was like, holy crap, I never would have had the guts to do that when I was in your shoes. Like and it also put me in that. I think that was something else I started realizing is I didn't think of myself as someone who is inspiring. I have like a whole model. I have a model for everything, Carl, but like I had a model of like how much are you able to influence teams towards an objective, and do you have to like direct them? Can you convince them? Can you motivate them? Can you inspire them? And I didn't think I was inspirational. I'm just not that. I am the at my best, I am the stable rock in the storm, and that's what I was in all the roles I've been in. I'm the person who doesn't have a lot of like emotional, ups, not a lot of emotional downs. I sort of bounce around in the middle, and that's okay. But it means I'm not like, everybody, let's go get it, and everybody's inspired and wants to go. And then I had a conversation with someone, and I think this two similar conversations, but one I remember where someone found out I was leaving after I decided to leave, and they said, oh, wow, that's a bummer. And I was like, yeah, I know. I mean, but, I'm going to go, well, and they basically said something to the effect of, I took your course. That's why I switched jobs. I switched jobs to do what you do because I took your training and I saw. And so I realized like also the place where I think I reached that inspirational level is not necessarily leading teams, but it's when I'm teaching. It's when I'm coaching. It's when I'm like, that's where, I seem to be able to add the most value. So like, if someone's out there and you have this role where you're like, all I want is someone who manages and mentors people to be better people, like I just slot right into that. The challenge, of course, is that I become disconnected from reality and go down some sort of weird guru path. So, but that was where I felt like I always helped the most. It was not me being the leader. It was me helping the leader. So could I turn that into a job?
I will say, this is a little bit of a side note, but I think Jesse is the one who taught me this, but someone said that the easiest way to inspire others is to be inspired, very visibly. And I think,
That
you know,
fits.
what I will say, one thing for you that I always appreciated is, even, you know, in this conversation, you are very upfront when you are impressed, when you are inspired. Like, you will actually tell someone, oh my God, like, I never would have had the guts to do that. And I think that is in turn how you actually are inspiring, is you're very genuine and upfront with when you are inspired and enthusiastic in that praise.
Mm.
And I think that is infectious, right? Like, that is something that will permeate the team. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're onto something there too, because those moments when I teach, I love the stuff I teach. I loved being taught it by the people that taught it to me. And I love teaching it. It is exciting to me. It makes me weird because I read like a giant book by Mike Cohn, and I think it's fun. Not everybody's that way, but, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. So yeah, that's a really good insight.
so let's talk about the idea of going into a consultancy, or like founding a consultancy in many ways, right? Because like, that is very different than founding a dev studio, or even founding, like, you know, we had Eli Allen from Wild Blue Studios on, who went and founded an art house, which is like, it's not really a dev studio either, but it's not a consultancy either. Like, it's we do this one very specific thing, right? So as you were deciding to go into this path, which, you know, I have the privilege of basically knowing your entire job history. You did not, prior to this, really do any consultancy. You didn't have necessarily a ton of exposure to it. What all did you have to learn? What are your big thoughts now that you've sort of been through it about choosing to go down that path, right? Like, as a founder journey, as a step out of a thing, right? Like, you chose a very, what I would consider a relatively uncommon path within games. What are your, you know, X number of years later, what are your big conclusions about
it? 5 years later, I think the consultancy is a potential trap because it's so easy to get started. Like, you file papers with a state or a government or whatever, and they're like, cool, you're a business now. And you go get like a G Suite set up for your email or something. And like, you put a website up that just says, you know, under construction or whatever. Ta-da, I'm a consultancy. Hello, I'm now no longer Benjamin Carcich. I am the founder, at the time co-founder of Valarin Inc. Later, Building Better Games sort of became the doing business as kind of name. But as I look at that, I think that's one that people should realize up front. With a lot of other companies, if you're selling goods, if you're selling even software, you have to go and you have to, like, okay, well, I know I'm going to be making software, and do I need to hire people? And you have to, with consultancy, you're selling yourself. And so I have everything I need at a overly simplistic level. And so now it's just a question of, immediately you have bills, because now you're paying for that G Suite. Now you gotta update your things, and they start really low. But of course, you probably want to make money because you don't want to just burn out all your savings with no hope of return. So you're also have, like, you gotta pay rent and whatnot. So bills are right there, right from the start. You've got this business, and you're thinking to yourself, well, I know how to do a thing that a lot of people seem to want to really well. Let me just go put myself out there. And then immediately you're confronted with the problem of, like, wait, how the heck do I do that? And I think, going back, that problem was not taken seriously enough. And part of that was because we were reasonably well connected with Riot and ex-Riot folks who are reasonably well connected across the industry. And there were a couple of good contracts that came in like the first 12 months. And it was like, oh, this is great. Look at this. It's all working out. And I think, like, one of the ways I've pictured it is, when you were doing the job before you became the consultant, what you did, like, your job was like, all that was it. It was like, I am an expert at being a producer, or whatever it is that you're doing, that you're thinking about becoming a consultant. That is who I am. And then you found a company, And now the way it's almost like you have this big pie that was everything, and now whoosh, that's just one piece. And there's all these other pieces that are part of owning a company and part of being a founder of a company. And everything you knew that you thought was so valuable is this, is 15% of that pie now. And everything else is trying to get somebody else to actually be interested in that 15%. I don't think I took that seriously enough early on. And so there were, in the same way that I think games can no longer, if you build it, they will come. Like you have to solve the problem of player acquisition. A consultant has to solve this problem of how am I going to be known by people who are going to want my services? And I don't care how many friends you know, because that might, in our case, it got us a couple things. And almost everything we got was referrals or referrals from referrals or whatever. But that's going to run dry. I don't care how good of a network you are, especially if you're not actually perceived as adding a lot of value in those spaces, if you're not considered credible. And the further you go from your actual experience, even though you're actually gaining a lot of experience, you're getting experience in unrelated stuff to that 15% that's actually what you're trying to sell. So be aware of that. Be aware that nobody cares. Like, I mean, if you think employers don't care about their employees, and perhaps that's true at some, abstracted level or something, nobody cares about you as a consultancy. And you have to be okay with that. Like, if it bothers you when people just don't show up to the call that you scheduled, like, I mean, I'm not saying don't be bothered because maybe that's rude or whatever, but I always remembered being at Riot, and there was at least one time, maybe more, where I was sort of the key point of contact to a consultant. And the way I would describe it is like, hey, look, you're number 17 on my to-do list, and I only have time for the top 3. And so every time if you're a consultant, you drop off someone's calendar or they won't get back to you and no one responds, you get ghosted. You can't be like, well, that's rude. Those people it's like, no, they're busy people. They're in companies. They have full-time jobs. You are somewhere down the stack of very important things they have to do as a consultant. You are so far, you're so much further down, and you wish you weren't, right? If you worked at their company, you'd be so much more important. You're a consultant, man. And I think this idea of like, it doesn't mean they don't care about the thing you're offering, but maybe they won't have time. And there's a million reasons why contracts fall through. So I think that was one. All of that is like, nobody cares. Nobody cares about you. Your mom cares about you. Good to go. Congratulations. Thanks, Mom. Other than that, that's it. The other thing, not only do they not care, but it's nobody else's job to make anybody want to care. And so you have to go do the idea of marketing, getting yourself out there, pushing, figuring out like, well, what would be something that the market would want? Like in games, we talk about like product market fit. We talk about like, who's my audience, these sorts of things. You're doing that same thing as a consultancy. Again, lots of people care about leadership in the same way we care about starving children in the third world. You need to make it something that they actually would say, wow, this would move the needle. And this is one of the reasons where, especially the type of consulting I went into, I didn't realize how challenging it is, because what am I trying to do? I'm trying to level leaders up in your organization. I'm trying to provide training. I'm trying to provide models and frameworks. I do some like direct go in and like help you build out work systems or help you estimate or help you, joking with you before, like build out your HR system a little bit, because I guess that was something that you were struggling with and I can give you opinions on. There's a lot of stuff you end up being able to do. What do they actually want? And how do you figure that out in a world where there's really no feedback that you're going to get? Being in consultancy, you get the same amount of feedback you get when you're interviewing for companies, because you're going to go out and you're going to ask a bunch of people, and you occasionally see that person on LinkedIn or social media or something, and they're just like angry that nobody's getting back to them and no one's giving them feedback. And it's that same way of like, this kind of reinforces that idea of nobody cares. You're not going to get good feedback about why they liked your services if they hired you, or why they didn't hire you if they seem to like you. Oh, this is another thing to keep in mind if you're in consultancy. Until the money's in the bank, it's not real. And it's only as real as the amount of money in the bank. So if you had a contract for 4 months and they paid the first month and they're paying monthly or whatever it is, they pay the first month. It is real for the first month now. You have to act like it's real the whole way, but never on the back end go like, yeah, don't worry. I'm talking to 5 different people and those conversations seem to be going well. No joke. I think every consultant will go through this. Most of the ones that I've talked to have. You're going to have like, oh, look at all these promising leads I've got right now. I'm talking to this person, talking to that. Oh, yeah. They're totally saying they need my help. And like, yeah, this is exactly what we're looking for. And like 3 months later, they've all ghosted you. None of them have said why. You're kind of trying to figure it out if you have like connections to connections of like, hey, any idea what happened over there? And you can't treat anything as real, and you will not get good feedback from the system. And this means that you have to constantly be willing to like just apply your judgment in the absence of good data. Because unless you're some giant firm that can run analytics and A/B test a million different ads, or you want to hire some often very expensive marketing, like, and by the way, as soon as you say you're a founder of a company, you've gotten these, I guarantee it. Like everybody and their mom is coming in with their little boutique. We do the best thing for whatever it is you offer. I picked the doing business as building better games. So you can imagine I get all the people that are like, we'll help you with 3D modeling. We do full art support. We do engineering. Like, I'm like, I just now have a response to say I don't make games.
Yeah. The fun one that we get at Gem and Tea is we get people who either want us to sell their tea or want us to help get our tea into supermarkets.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I've like thought about what if I just like pretended and just had a conversation with you, but that would be more funny for you, I think. It's like, oh yeah, RT. Well, which kind are you looking for? But this is again this thing of everybody's out there, they're all selling, and it's easy to, by the way, look at all those and go, this is so annoying. But you have to realize that's your voice now. You're a consultant. Now, there's better and worse ways to do that, right? You don't have to be the person who spams out to everybody that has founder in their title. Do you need HR support for this weird, like, finance, their like payment solution, whatever? But you're trying to find the good ways. And I think this is another piece of advice I would give to somebody that would be going into consultancy. So what I covered a few years, like, yeah, nobody cares.
15% of your job.
15% of your job. Everything else you're going to have to figure out. You have to do all the marketing and sales. No one's going to do it for you. Your referrals will eventually dry up. Unless if you're providing a product, you have to find the product market fit. And you're going to get terrible feedback from the system. If you're like me, I'm not really a marketing sales guy. Actually, that's a big weakness for me. And it's a serious problem in the business. You can't be ashamed to try to sell your services. I know you don't want to come off like the random bunch of spam you get via all the sources, but the reality is you have to put yourself out there. Maybe coming back to that idea of in games and in consultancy, if you build it, they won't come. They won't know.
I mean, what I'm struck by with all of this is how much this is a founder's journey in the same way that I've experienced it, in the same way that I've talked to a bunch of people on here, right? Like oftentimes when you go in to found a development studio as the founder, right? Like obviously the purpose of the company is very different and potentially more in line with, what you've always done, that 15% of your job of making a game, right? Like that's the whole company now. And so like that has potentially more alignment, but as the founder, especially as the founder CEO, yeah, all that stuff that you did at big companies is now 15% of your job, and you have to go and learn the rest of it. And, similarly, like you use your referrals to get to fundraising sources, but that's sales. Again, like you're selling yourself to either publishers or VCs or angels or friends and family or the bank to get loans, right? And you're never going to get great feedback out of that system and all this kind of stuff. And so like, it's interesting because like the type of work you do and the organization and the whole purpose is very, very different. But the actual like lessons you're speaking to of the founder's journey of it are very similar to many of the conversations we've had here.
Well, I would say even now that you've sort of bridged that in my mind, I immediately go also credibility. If I'm founding a game studio, I have to think about who my founders are, not just from a perspective of who do I like to work with that I think is aligned to my vision, although that should probably be heavily prioritized, but also who's going to help me get money? Who's going to have the right resume that pulls? And so on the consultancy side, that looks like, well, I need to build credibility because everybody's like, well, so I posted 5 to 6 days a week at least on LinkedIn for over a year. And I grew my follower count from like 2,000 to 10,000. This is by no means like you see people do this in way shorter amounts of time. I am not great. I do not like social media. I do not like being on LinkedIn. It's a huge part of my job now because that's where my audience is. And so you've got to go do that, even if that's uncomfortable. But while you're doing that, that's a little piece of credibility. The podcast, which started out as just literally me and my co-founder, a guy named Aaron, who's a great guy. He and I used to at Riot go sit outside and have like hours long conversations about like what were we seeing and how were we approaching games and what were leaders doing and how were the teams responding and all this different stuff. And we eventually said, maybe we should just like record that. And when we left and we co-founded this thing together, he was my co-founder, the podcast was a piece of that. But over time, the podcast became a credibility mechanism of like, well, we have a top 10% podcast, one of the only ones in the world that talks about game production specifically and leadership in games specifically. There's some other out there that are pretty adjacent, but that's what we're hitting. Like we're trying to help ourselves to some extent when we first started, or the mid-level leader or the senior level leader who's like hasn't had the time to think through and has never been trained in most of what they're doing, actually have an understanding of like, how would I step forward from here? We talk about like, how do you create a vision? What does it mean to have a healthy culture? What does it mean to have a good game vision? And, how do you find product market fit? What does estimation mean? How does agile apply to game development? Like there's all these different things, and we have guests on, and it started out, it was just fun, but over time we realized this is credibility. And I did GDC talks, the last 2 years. And part of that is I want to get ideas I have in my head out into the world. But also, I'd be lying if I didn't say part of that is like, that's credibility. I've done GDC talks. I actually did a keynote, so I can say I'm a keynote speaker. I did a talk in India. I'm an international speaker, right? You're collecting this. The one I don't have is author yet. And I've debated just like publishing a little book or something on like estimation in game development. Because I wrote I did a course on that. I'm working on a course on it. Actually, it's an early access. Here's my plug. I wrote like a huge script for it accidentally. I accidentally wrote 230 pages on estimation in game development. And I was like, I just accidentally wrote a book, I think. And it's not really, because it has to be edited and there's a ton of work. And that's the other thing I think to realize. You have to go out and build your own credibility. And it's all harder than you think. Like, making a podcast is harder than you think. Writing a book is harder than you think. I've looked into it. I've had early like email conversations with publishers. I've talked to other people who have published books. Doing a GDC talk is harder than you think. Everything is going to be harder than you think. It's going to take more time than you think, just like games. And actually, I think this is the truth of knowledge work generally in the human sphere, whether you're by yourself or in a group. This stuff is always going to take longer than you think. And that's because when you think about like, well, what do I have to do to write a book? I have to write a bunch. Well, actually, it's almost like that's the 15% again. And now you have to now I got to find the publisher. I got to figure out how to self-publish, and I got to find who's going to do the graphics. Does it need graphics? And if I just make a book and put it out, like, do I want to market it? Well, how much do I want to invest in marketing it? Do I want to invest money in marketing it? Because if I invest, like, is that going to come back? Or is that just maybe the money's worth it for indirect credibility value? Like even if I know a guy who he wrote 4 books, and he said he's made and it was years ago. And I think he's made like less than $1,000, but they were huge for his credibility. And so he considers it worthwhile. And so you're looking at this, and again, to compare to the journey of a lot of the founders, all of this is like, hey, do I have a team that can build something? Are we producing something that's valuable? Can I show that to investors? Here's a prototype. Do I have the right people on the team? Do I feel like I'm attracting the right talent? Hey, we put a Steam page up. Look at the wish lists it got without really any marketing. You're trying to produce all these artifacts and things that help people find you and see you positively. And all of that is in that 85% that's not in why you were doing what you were doing. Like what I wanted to do and what I ended up doing. And by the way, this is why whenever I see either a studio close because the founders no longer wanted to do it, or I see a consultancy shut down because the person's just like, I'm just going to go back in the industry. I think it's very easy to put judgment on like, oh, you gave up or you failed or something like that. And I'm just always like, I get it. Like I totally understand. And not even to mention that it could very well have just been economic necessity, right? That it just wasn't going the way it needed to for them to continue living their lives. And they've got wives and kids and whatever else, right? Like, someone's got to feed the dog, and that dog, so anyway, all this stuff, I guess. Yeah. I like the connection that you tied. And by the way, credibility isn't just look at this cool job I had once. That gets you a little bit, does not get you as far as you want.
Yeah. And I think, the interesting challenge, at least from my experiences thinking about engaging with consultants and that kind of stuff, the challenge is oftentimes that, hey, look at this cool job I had once, that gives me a credibility boost. The longer you're away from it, that degrades sort of exponentially. And it can even turn into a point where it's like, well, you've been doing consultancy, so how much do you really know about building games anymore, right? Like,
exactly.
And you have to find ways to continually refresh that credibility, find new ways to do it, because if you do rely on that one job, and like, this is not unfamiliar to me on the game studio founder side, right? Like, for a long time, up until probably about 2 years ago when I decided to start funding Jam&T, being a Riot founder, like someone who ex-Riot, going to found a studio, similar to ex-Blizzard, right? Like, there were these studios that were considered, oh, well, you clearly know a thing or two, and so you had an easier time of it due to that pedigree. And now, in many ways, it's the reverse, right? There's been enough challenges from ex-large studio, like Riot and Blizzard certainly get, a target painted on their back a fair amount, but like, it's really ex-Ubisoft, any large studio. People have started to figure out, like, oh, that job you had at a big studio has nothing to do with actually a small studio or a startup. And so is that actually helpful or not, right? Like,
yes, there's a founder I know who was an artist, became a founder, ex-Riot, and the way he described it was, all of my experience leading and managing in the AAA, he was like Blizzard, Riot, like very good history. It was all contraindicative of my success as a studio founder. Like, I had to unlearn so much. Just right in what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of any sort of startup journey is, I often ask the question, like, what's the biggest thing you had to go and learn? And what's the biggest thing, you would sort of tell people who are thinking about starting stuff? And often I find that the biggest thing that folks actually have to learn is unlearning, not learning something whole cloth new. It's like, oh, I have to unlearn all this way that I used to do things to learn this new way of doing things, right? Let's talk a little bit about what I classically would do is a little bit about fundraising. But obviously, in a consultancy, similar to when I talk to some sort of co-dev shops, it's not fundraising in a traditional sense. Like, when I think of fundraising, it's like, oh, go and do the song and dance, go and pitch a bunch of people. But for you, it's really about like, okay, now I have to go and get clients and jobs, and I have to stack a certain number of jobs. Take me through a bit of how you think about that, right? Because like you've mentioned, like, the money's not real until it's in the bank, which I think is just good advice, period. But there's obviously breakpoints where it's like, okay, when do I spend money on X and Y and Z? And when do I pay myself? When do I pay another human potentially, right? Like, and how you think about that trajectory of success or just financial responsibility in some way, and how that correlates to like getting a number of jobs. Because like, for me on the outside, that's always felt like really intimidating, as far as like, okay, how many jobs does it need to be, and what is that flow of cash going to look like? It's going to be unpredictable, but like, it feels unknowably unpredictable to me from the outside. And so I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about, like, especially 5 years in, how has that changed? How has that evolved? And how do you think about that from a general point of view?
So what was the phrase you just used? Unknowably. It still feels unknowable to me. And I think I said this earlier. This is one of the areas that I feel like I am worst at that I should be much better at to do what I'm doing. You are going through all those questions. What do I charge? And you ask 10 different experts in the space what you should charge for a particular service. You get 10 different answers. You could just go to the pure reality of capitalism and just go like, I can charge what the market will bear. What someone will pay. That's what I can charge. What if that's not enough? Okay, can you make the offer worth more? Can you make the service that you provide worth more? And what does that even mean? Because oftentimes people will pay a lot more money for something that's not actually that much better because of some perception or some way that it was framed. Like the idea of humans as rational actors as it relates to finance it's been debunked endlessly. Like Daniel Kahneman I think was the one who developed the framing of econ, right? Like that humans are rational actors inside of economic systems. They're not. Neither are you. You probably want more than you should ask for your service, except when you're asking way too little for that service, and everybody's willing to pay way more. I saw a little meme somewhere. It was probably LinkedIn, but it could have been somewhere else. It was just related to like consulting and offering services, and it was something like, charge of $500, and they had this, the client was like, and I want to see this and I want to see that, and you need to make sure and deliver on this timeline and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And like client for $50,000. And it's like, cool. What's your bank number? Why? But it's so real. That's so real. Some of my biggest clients were just like, okay, here's a whole pile of money. I'm like, what? And other times you're like, is it worth it for me for this extra like few $100 even to go through this process? Like I'm trying to do the right thing and be a good person in this and all this different stuff, but like, holy cow, like I don't need this mess, And a friend of mine, he does architectural design and civil engineering, and after he started becoming successful, he realized like I have to fire a ton of my clients because they are not worth the time. I think this happens in anything where you're trying to make money. You have to realize that like everything, like this is true in all of life, but it becomes so especially true. Opportunity cost is king. Wherever you're investing time, it means you're not investing time on anything else. So as I think about bringing in money, one, not great at it, landing clients and landing contracts and those sorts of things. Two, I've had the debate for the last year of, do I want to become the person who would be good at this? That's a real serious thing I've been puzzling with, because there's a part of me that goes like, well, Ben, you should just go and really, get the training and do the thing and blah, 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 and become that person. There's another part of me that's like, I don't know if that's actually, I wonder if I was doing so much more of that, I don't think I'd want to do this at all. What does that mean? Does that mean I'm no longer in the space where I should be, right? Again, the Venn diagrams, are we unoverlapping? In my own business, is what the business needs me to do and what I want to do no longer the same? And so what are the other ways and how can I bring in money? And I think it's crazy how creative you can be if you actually stop and have to think about it of like, what are the ways I could bring in money? How could I do this and that and the other? I'm not super creative in that, but I've talked to other people that are super, and they have cool ideas, and you can go out, you can talk to people and they're like, oh, you find this weird tax break or this other thing, or this, like, there's all this stuff, if you're out there in your video game startup and you haven't had a qualified accountant go through and figure out what sort of benefits you can get from the government and wherever you're located, you should do that. It could be worth a lot of money.
Especially in Canada.
I think Australia is also good for this. And there's weird other sideways that you can gain from that too. It's crazy. So, but as a consultancy, like when I think about that, the thing is you have to put cycles into there, or you have to pay someone to put cycles into there. And the problem is it's really hard to pay someone to put cycles into there because you are not getting good feedback out of that system, as I've already discussed. And that means if it doesn't go well, was it your fault? Is the product bad? Is it their fault? Are they just bad at marketing it? Who's the person that's like riding shotgun with you in your call going like, you messed up this, this, and this? You don't have one. And I have put some effort into having mentors who can help guide during this space, but and by the way, do that. And also, they aren't going to solve that for you. They can't solve that for you. You still have to do it.
I do wonder, like, this is my very much, I live in a different world, right? Like, I'm a startup. There's a lot of that stuff, but in many ways, startups have big fundraising rounds that then hopefully, in an ideal case, I guess, let me clarify, in my ideal case, I have a relatively large funding round that then helps me continue to exist for some amount of time, and I can make strategic decisions about how do I deploy that money. But in, one of the places, like, I also don't feel like I'm a particularly great salesperson, and one of the places that we've talked about looking for help is on that sort of like player acquisition, marketing side, but also that idea that like some of the marketing we have to do is to publishers or to VC funds in order to get our products to, to do those future fundraising rounds. And so one of the calculus that I do in my head is like, at what point do I go and bring someone into the business who is strong where I am weak, who can take ownership of that, right? And on my side of the world, right, like that's a pretty clear calculation of like, well, what is that person going to cost? What is that going to do to our runway? How do we navigate those things? I imagine when your runway is not a more fixed, understandable number and is highly variable, like that calculus is much harder. Maybe it's differential equations or some other advanced math that makes my head hurt. But do you think about that sort of side of things of like, what if I brought someone more into the business who specializes in that to offload that, right? Where the part of the business, like in that thing, I take a big chunk of the 15 of the, not the 15% that I care about, and offload it to the person whose their 15% overlaps with that much better. Is that a thing in consultancy, right? Like especially smaller boutique consultancies?
Yeah. I mean, if it's interesting, the advice I would give to myself actually, hey, you can be really creative in how you extend runway because it's just you. There's a reason that many of the people that do these sort of boutique services end up living in places like the Philippines or Cambodia or wherever. They've lowered their cost of living. If you can live on $1,000 a month comfortably, and there are places in the world where that's possible, more than possible, and you don't mind the trade-offs of that because like you're a single person or your family wants to travel anyway or whatever. I don't know. Like usually it's single people that'll do something like this. Congratulations. Giant extension of your runway as your runway is basically your bank account, right? The time when you bring in someone else, it's interesting. I don't think I prioritize this enough. And actually Aaron, my co-founder, wanted to do this a lot more, and we did it sometimes, and sometimes it worked out really well and sometimes it didn't. I think if I was giving advice to someone, I would say, usually if you're starting a consultancy, you have some amount of runway built up. You have to spend money to make money. It's a truism. It's a guideline. It's not a rule, but like just accept that there's an aspect of that. There's a nugget in there somewhere for whatever your context is, almost certainly. And if you're going to mess with that stuff, do it when there's money in the bank, and then be really brutal about whether it's working or not. Like this is, I think, the thing that every founder needs to know. I think this is true in consultancy. I think this is true in founding a startup. I think especially those that come from big companies where there's a lot of chances for people that aren't working out or like ways to attack the problem. And like, well, we'll give them another 6 months, that team another 6 months to figure out if they can make that. And then it like, that feature goes out and it's sort of a meh, but like, wow, we finished it and we'll do a celebratory. Like you can't do that if you're a startup. It's not okay. And it's not okay, especially because if you're a startup that's hired anybody, you're not just playing, like I get to just play with sort of my own life to some extent. I do have a chief of staff that I sort of pay a part-time wage, and it's like a 1099 employee, and there's some others, but like that's all sort of pieced out contract stuff. And I just have to mess with me. If I was a founder of a startup, you have to be willing to make the hard call about whether something's working or not so fast. And that's also something, I'll be honest, I'm not great at. And so it's hard for me to want to engage, to go. Sometimes I get a message from someone on LinkedIn and I actually read it and I go, that might actually help me. And I like how they frame this message. And I like the way that didn't feel like they were blowing smoke up my butt. I get a million messages like, oh, I love how you're empowering leaders. And I watched this episode of blah, blah, blah. And AI said I should tell you this was a nice summary of it. And I'm like, stop. But some people just are like, hey, a lot of people get stuck here. I help people with that. And I'm like, oh, I'm stuck there. Good job. You've found product market fit. Do I have capital to invest? And if I don't, because I try to do every aspect of everything myself, when I get to that point, now I'm going, shoot, can I figure out how to work? Can I get them to work on commission? Yeah, maybe, maybe not. Because they don't know if I have product market fit. They don't know if my product's any good. Why should they take a commission? And I get it. It's like, I want, shared success. You win, I win. That's what I constantly try to align with every contractor I have. When I win, you win. Can I set that up? Because I want there to be aligned incentives. I do have one right now, that is actually very helpful, but I generally don't like, doing hours-based contracts, and I don't like having other people do them with me. Because I worry about the incentives it creates. It creates oh, cool, we'll do more work. So anyway, you should be looking at the things that you really suck at. For me, unfortunately, that's marketing and sales. And it's really hard to find good ones. There's a million out there. The really good ones are really expensive. And I think earlier on, when there was capital available in the bank account, spending large amounts of money. But we, to be fair, we did some of that. And oftentimes it just didn't work out. And maybe the thing I should take away from that is, okay, we don't have product market fit. Maybe the product's no good. But this is, again, you don't have feedback. It's the same thing that games always run into as they're developing. How long do I run down this path that isn't quite working, hoping that the next innovation along this path will cause it to click together, versus when do I pivot? And there are guidelines around that. There are people that can give you advice around that. The problem is, you don't know if you're one more pivot away from, or one more small iteration away from, oh, this clicks in and it's great. Or if you should have pivoted 6 months ago and you've already spent way more money than you had available. Same thing happens in the consultancy around all this stuff. So I've changed the product offering. Originally it was very much consultant focused with a little bit of training. And then we tried to do all training for a while. Then we went back to consulting because the training wasn't panning out. Because again, actually, if training as a B2C endeavor means that you really need visibility, people really need to trust you. You need to be filling up classrooms with people who have spending capital, and your audience will probably understand this. If my audience is junior to mid to senior level producers and leaders in game development, these aren't exactly people who are sitting on extra thousands of dollars to invest in their development, as valuable as I think it might be. And in the same way, it's so easy to, in your own mind, go, the value I provide is worth so much more than what you're going to pay me. And I also understand you don't have any time and you don't feel like you have any money as a founder of a startup or as a scaling company that's trying to figure out how to handle all these people, or as a sustained company. Do I think I can add massive value to your company? Do I think that I've proven that to some extent? Yes. But I also know I'm in the indirect value space. I make your leaders better. I train your people to be more effective. I sometimes get annoyed. I think everybody's struggling right now, but I get jealous of the people that do something like marketing or whatever, because it's I increase ROI by this much based on, here is my history of results. And I'm like, what did you do? I helped your leaders get better. Do you want, 10%, 20%, 50%, 100% better leaders? What's that worth? Something. It's worth something. It's non-zero, but you probably need to sell it better than that to get anybody to buy it.
Yeah, and I think, I imagine there is also some of this that you've been at this for 5 years. So I imagine that there was also a very different tone and tenor of sales and rapport in your first 2 years of existence than the last 3 in our very famously stable and on an upswing game industry as a whole here in June
Yeah.
2025.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So let's talk a little bit.
Can I hit on something there just real quick?
Yeah.
This has actually been something that I've had to try to figure out my own framing around. And I bet a lot of founders, yourself included, are in the same boat. Because when I go out and I talk to other people that are doing something similar to what I do, a lot of them, even who have been in business for sometimes decades, are struggling right now. There's a contraction in tech and games. There's a lot of economic uncertainty that coincides with geopolitical uncertainty that causes people to, like, I'm going to hold and wait. You can tell them all the truths about how, like, well, counterintuitively, now's the time to. No, we're not rational actors inside of the system. We are emotional beings who are occasionally rational. And so we're holding right now. A lot of people are holding. And I can't blame that. Because if I go to a place where I just go, first 2 years when we were absolutely awful, the business has gotten so much better at, like, trying to produce something that I think people will want and all this different stuff. I believe that is true. And simultaneously, interest has reduced. And again, matching all these other people's experiences. And yet, you have to, as long as you keep doing it, you have to go, okay, how do I thread this needle? I cannot blame the circumstance for my inability to succeed right now. Because if I do, I have now lost agency over my own business. I might as well just stop. Just stop and go back and get a job. And so you're constantly trying to balance these two things of, don't overbeat yourself up, because sometimes the external world is a relevant force in why you're struggling, and you still have to do whatever you can. You still have to show up. So anyway, sorry, it's something I've thought a lot about, because it's like, it's easy to just go like, it's the outside. No. What can I do? How can I do it? What would be the different thing? Who have I not contacted? What haven't I done?
I think that actually segues nicely. So thank you. A big part of what we talk about here is, what I'm trying to highlight and help folks understand through talking to folks who are walking this path is, what is that sort of individual's experience going on this journey as a founder, in your case, as a founder of consultancy, but as a founder in general. And a lot of it is about that mental and emotional struggle with exactly what you just talked about, or like, hey, it's going to be easy to externalize blame, but to have the business continue, there's an amount of, okay, well, yeah, the world could be going to shit. I still have to show up every day and try to make something happen and that kind of stuff. And that often can be, not even often, that is basically always just a lot to ask of someone, right? And so one of the places that I like to talk about is, what do people set up for themselves to support themselves, right? Like, and so the way I normally tee this up is what is your biggest struggle as a founder, and how have you been approaching supporting yourself through it, right? Like, you have to show up every day. You have to go through this, how are you saying, like, okay, this is what I do to support myself as I go on this very difficult journey?
This is a very complex one, because worldview actually plays into this, for me at least. So I'm a religious guy. I'm a Christian. I have a faith in an ultimate God and an ultimate reality that is greater than anything we'll experience here. Some people believe that, some people don't. I do. And what it means is that, to some extent, it doesn't remove anxiety. But because I really do believe that, it's okay, is something I say a lot. And I don't mean that in, like, everything is always okay in every little bitty way, but that, like, in the broad, things are going to be okay. So I think my worldview helps a lot. I sometimes wonder if I, like, didn't have those beliefs, if I would never have done this in the first place. Like, the risk just isn't worth it. I think I probably still would have, but I think it'd be a lot more anxiety inducing. And so, whatever, I don't know if that's like my cheat code or, I don't know but that helps. And then, like, with that, I have other things I'm doing in the rest of my life. In the last 5 years, blown out my shoulder. I've had an ACL tear. I've had 2 children. There's a third on the way. I got married, by the way. I like moved locations. There was obviously a pandemic. I've given some GDs. Like, there's a lot. Everything's always happening. And I think what's interesting is that will always be true. I maybe part of it is like this framing. I don't know if this was like the military background of like how you deal with complexity or chaos or whatever. I think there's this part of like young me that wanted to, well, someday I'll reach this point where like it's all just, I wake up and I do good things every day, and like whether that's meaningful or happy or whatever your worldview is, right? I'll just do those things. And then I'll go to bed and I'll wake up the next day and I'll do that again. And that's not how life is. I think some people actually like, that's really hard to realize. And for me, I think I fought that for some amount of time. I still wanted that to be true, especially when I was in the Army. Like, I didn't want to be a combat arms officer, and I ended up in combat arms. And while the U.S. was engaged in 2 active, like, scaled wars, or conflicts, whatever you want, we were in 2 wars. And so, like, I knew I was going to go toward, like, odds are I'm going towards those wars. And I always wanted to be like a signal guy, right? I'm like, yeah, I'll help. I got a computer systems engineering degree. I was like, I'll help set up your networks. I can do all this different stuff. And they were like, no, you're going to be a tanker. And then I ended up doing logistics. And I had no idea how to do logistics. I'd never been trained in that. I had to figure that out. And so I was in Afghanistan figuring out logistics and kind of going like, well, at least I'm not on the combat arms thing, because I wasn't really that excited by that. But what if I had been, right? Which would have been just as easy. Okay, then that's where right? And all of life is just like, well, here you are. And I do look to, yes, I'm a Christian. You look at some of the Eastern wisdom traditions, and they align so strongly with this idea of like, look, you're on the journey and you can't fight where the journey takes you. You have some amount of agency on that, right? You're going to make good decisions and bad decisions. I changed my personal motto actually, from always learning, because I was like, oh, I want to always be learning and always learning. And I realized that became a tyrant to me. Or it was, well, you always have to be learning. You always have to, okay, everything you have to look at it as a lesson. And it became like incredibly exhausting. And it's not that there's not value in always learning, but it was too strong. And I switched my motto to be and be better. And be is like, accept where I am, accept my capability. But I want more capability than I have. No, it doesn't matter. You have to be who you are right now. And there's things I'm good at and there's things I'm not good at. There's things I wish I was good at. There's things I'm good at that I wish I wasn't good at, because I end up doing those things. And also, though, be better. Look at like, what is the better version of you? Like something I recommend all leaders do. I think it was a prequel to a LinkedIn post I think I wrote or something. No, it was a newsletter. Okay. So it was just 2 things leaders should know. Where is your team? Whoever your people that are following you, either because they have to or because they want to. Hopefully they want to. But whoever the group of people you lead is, where are they today? Great. What's ideal? What's the delta? How are you going to walk them between it? Now, look at you the same way. Where are you today? What's the ideal you? Great. There's a delta. Don't beat yourself up about the delta. You're never reaching the ideal you. Your team is never reaching the ideal team. Start taking steps. And so anyway, be and be better. I think those are the things that allow me. And then like, I do have a wife. I've got a couple kids. One of the things that I thought was actually going to be way harder, I used to rock climb and I play pickup soccer, football for the international audience. I blew out my shoulder, and several months later, I blew out my knee. I no longer can really climb as hard as I like to. So I just have stopped climbing. I'm going to try to figure out what I'm going to do now. It wasn't like a long hobby. I only did it for a couple of years, and I don't know what happened. But boom, there you go. Like getting older, shoulder, AC joint stretched. It's not going to do it anymore. Then I blew out my ACL, spent 14 months, finally back on the field now. When I run, I feel slow and I'm limping. I can't not sort of, and maybe it'll get better over time and maybe it won't. If I was 22, it'd probably get better. I'm 40. Might not get better.
Yep.
Like that might just be who I am now. I was already getting slower every year anyway. the reason I bring up those stories is I thought that the climbing and the soccer were key parts of my, the way I cope with the challenges and the stress. I had neither of them for a year, and it was okay. And that's interesting. I'm still very happy to be back playing soccer, and I still wish I could go back and do climbing, but it's actually okay. It's shocking how much, if you just actually accept where you are, the B part, that you can actually handle. And I'm not saying go make life insanely difficult for yourself, but like recognize that you're actually more capable than you probably realize. And it's not because you're already, I don't like a lot of the modern messaging around like, you're already amazing. That's not the point. That's not the point. I think that misses things, actually. I think that can cause people to not think they need to do the be better part. It causes them to obsess about the being. But you can do more than you realize. You can, in that moment of stress, when your entire life has trained you, like at a work meeting or whatever, that this is the moment where you blow up or have an out, whatever it is. You can in that moment go, I'm not going to do that. Even though I didn't get to do my usual way that I calmed myself last week. I'm going to be a better version of me right now. And I think that's what's interesting. Simon Sinek has a thing where like, how do you know someone loves you? And his point is it's never a grand gesture. It's the million little things that happen over time. How do you know you're a leader? It's not some grand gesture. It's a million little things over time. That's how you win, is in the million little things. And I don't mean you win as a business. I'm consulting. I'm adjacent to game dev. You're in game dev. These founders are in game dev. The easiest way to be Nostradamus in games is just to predict everything's going to fail. You're going to be right 98% of the time. Like, congratulations. It's not helpful. We're all in a very difficult industry, and you have to figure out what your success means, but show up every day in those little things and keep becoming a little bit of a better version of you while acknowledging who you are. And yeah, you're going to get hurt in weird ways, emotionally and physically and other things from just life happening as time goes on. And it's going to be a lot of unexpected stuff. Just keep showing up for the moments. And so I don't know. Yeah. So I think like for me, to answer your initial question without all the added, but it's like faith, family, like, yeah, there's some hobbies in there too, and I play way too much Escape from Tarkov. That's another one. So
I was curious which game was currently occupying your game time.
Oh man, I play too much. They released the PvE mode, and it's just perfect for an old has-been first-person shooter players that just like, there's just no other people in this. I just get to play, and everything's PvE.
What is kind of on the horizon for yourself and your company that you're thinking a lot about? Like 6 months, a year, right? Like what are the big things that you're like, I have to, like, it's not exactly what is keeping you up at night. It's not exactly like, what are you preparing yourself for? It's just the things that are on the horizon that you're like, okay, I'm processing how I want to get there. I'm processing what I got to do, and all of that.
So I don't know if I was supposed to talk about this, but I'm bad at marketing and sales, so I'm going to. Honestly, the big one is, hey, Ben, how long are you going to be able to keep doing this? At what point and to what degree do you shift options where sales and marketing is no longer a thing that you have to do? An example of that would be, okay, I'll go try to find part-time production contract work and, continue to do the podcast, continue to do the courses and the development, and continue to LinkedIn posts and all that, whatever things make sense. But sort of, is there a way I can solve the money problem by being either part-time or full-time contract or employee somewhere that would allow me to continue to do those things? And that is because, yeah, it's brutal out there. So that's the big one. And there's other stuff in there too. Like I made a course called Succeeding in Game Production, What You Weren't Taught. And I didn't really expect much to happen. And it actually did all right. And I'm in the midst, like I said earlier, of making an advanced estimation for game and software development course. And that one has also done all right. But these aren't like solving, it's not like, 1 million people bought it and now I don't know what to do with all the money I made, right? It's less than 100 people bought it, let's say. Well, the first one is now up to more, but it's been out for longer. But like second one, less than 100 people bought it. And so it's like, oh, that's not terrible, but that didn't solve all my questions about where I make money from and how I pay bills and take care of family and rent and these sorts of things. And there's the thought in my mind is I wanted to get to a third course, which was about people management and like, how do you manage well? Because most managers are untrained. Most managers that are trained, I think the majority of their training involved like explaining how the time card portal worked or whatever. Most people haven't thought about what it means to be someone's manager and to really sit at this point where you represent the business to the individual and the individual to the business. And how do you play in that space? Because the definition of that role is to be torn in those two directions. How do you do that in a way that honors both and upholds the responsibility you have from both? And also really, like, in my opinion, holds to a high ethical or moral standard. And so I wanted to do a course where I sort of help a manager kind of go through life cycle of an employee. And now I'm like going, am I going to get to make that course? Right? Finish the advanced estimation. And I that's also a question like, will I have the time to finish that? I think I will. It might just take longer if I end up doing like part-time work somewhere. But will I get to making that management course? And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that immediately cascades. I'm an overthinker. If you can't tell that from this conversation, you're not listening, but I'm an overthinker. Like, hey, Ben, if you make a course, but nobody like cares, does it matter? And I don't, it's like, that's a big existential question. Is this in the same way that another thing that's on that long-term horizon is like the book, right? What would be the book I would write? What would be the first book I would write? What would be the second book I would write? Maybe the first book shouldn't be the one I really want to write. It should be the test book where I learn how to write books. By the way, good tip for people making games out there. Your first game, don't make it like someone said this brilliantly. I don't remember who. Oh, I feel bad. Somebody said this really well, but they basically said, I see a lot of startups out there making their first game as if it's their third game. And it's too big, it's too scaled, it doesn't fit in the budget they have, and they're setting themselves up for failure as a result of that. Make your first game something smaller that proves that you can make a game. Now, and then someone will say like Claire Obscura or Claire Obscura Expedition 33, ta-da, first game, look at that. But
there are always outliers.
Exactly. Exception does not prove the rule. There's a lot more companies that could benefit from figuring out their end-to-end cycle first. And so for me, like I look at that with the book. Will I get to write the book? Will I get to do that course? Will I solve the problem of how I can actually add value into leaders in game development? And really, what does it mean that I've had so much struggle with it? Because I think there's this underlying vision that I've had, and it's that leaders in game development and in software development, a bunch of other places, are really more ignorant than malicious. Like 99.5% cases, this isn't a jerk who's trying to do the wrong thing. They're well-intentioned people trying to handle their responsibility, and you actually have never been taught how to lead. Sometimes that's because people are like, well, leadership isn't something that's taught, you're born with it or not. I don't buy that. I really don't buy that. Certainly, I think there are some personality traits and characteristics that might help you in certain ways and not in others, but like, I don't buy that. I think we have a lot of leaders out there that are doing their best, and the problem is their best isn't very good, and it's not because they suck. It's because they don't know what to do. And they're copying often dysfunctional patterns of the people that came before them who are doing the exact same thing. And so we have this cascade of people. And I was looking, like, as I look at leaving Riot and going out and seeing all these different companies and all these different, platforms and scales and all this different stuff, and looking and going like, there are shared trends across so many of these companies, and they all come back to leadership in my mind. And I think you could really help those leaders excel. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to change how leadership functioned in game development. I want to do that. And part of me goes, I worry that, one, I won't get to do that, but two, that actually the reality is that's not important to anybody. And I think the second one is a little bit scarier than the first. Not scary is not disappointing. Like, depressing that like, yeah, you go to any large organization and there's going to be inefficiencies. And that's okay. Small organizations have inefficiencies, but they're going to sort of grow as you get bigger. And a lot of times for highly successful organizations, and in games, these are the ones that I have what I call like the goose that lays the golden egg. I don't remember who first said it that way, but like, that's how I kind of view it. If you're right, you've got League of Legends. What does League of Legends do? Well, at a very pragmatic layer, it prints money. What does Call of Duty do for Activision? It prints money. What does World of Warcraft do for Blizzard? It prints money. Warframe, World of Tanks, RuneScape. Like, you have products out there in the world that are these live service. I didn't even mention Fortnite. How did I miss Fortnite? But like, there's so many. And if you're a company that has one, you have this great, like, you have this immense blessing. Like, congratulations, you have a thing that prints money. And also, what in the world does too much money do to a company? And how much bureaucracy are you going to over time stack up? How many more people than you actually need are you going to hire? Because you can get away with it. So I look at that and I go, so many of these large companies, and especially the smaller ones who never even get off the ground because they don't even realize, like, they're like me. They started the company without really going like, well, what does it mean for me to lead other people? What does it mean for me to do this thing, to be a founder, and to realize that, like, I was talking to a guy named Trent Custers, and he's the studio head over at League of Geeks. He was talking about his boss way back in the day, who was an engineer who became the like studio head or CEO or whatever of their company. And at one point when he was talking to him, he just said something to the effect of like, I did not want to be responsible for putting food on 65 families' tables. I wanted to make cool games, and I'm an engineer, and I just wanted to code them. And this is what I do now. Now I'm responsible for this. And I think that becomes really obvious for someone like you who's a founder, and a lot of people are listening to this who are founders. For the average leader, they don't realize the scaled impact of the fact that they, like, a phrase I use is like, other people pay for a leader's mistakes. And leaders should take that seriously. And it doesn't mean that inaction is a valid strategy. It's almost always not. In fact, the nature of leadership has changed, is like making things better than they were. Otherwise, you're not doing your job. When you show up, especially for those out there who are producers that aren't like some way hard skill associate or dual hatting or something, your role as a producer is to force multiply the effectiveness of whatever it is you're leading. And if you're not doing that, if you're just keeping it all static, unless if there's huge forces around you that are dragging that thing down hard, you're failing. And so you have to be active in change and driving all this. Do you know how to do that? Have you thought about your role as a leader? Or are you just like, well, the person before me filled out these 4 reports and, facilitated these 7 meetings and had these one-on-ones, and like, that's what I do, I guess. It's like, no, that's just some stuff. What's the value you bring? Do you know? Do you know what the value you bring? So I'm waxing philosophical here, but this is the thing that when I think about the industry, I think about me and the challenge of like, what does it look like? I go, is this just something that because the most successful companies don't have to worry about it because they print money, that we collectively as an industry are simply not going to solve except in like small pockets here and there? And those small pockets will slowly become that giant company. Is that just the reality? And what does it mean to accept that if it is? And still be trying to fight against that inertia. So that's a long way to answer your question.
A little bit, 1 or 2 things on your mind. Thank you so much for joining us and having the conversation and sharing your experience. Given that it's somewhat more critical to you than most folks I have on the podcast, if folks wanted to reach out and learn more about the courses that you're making or the stuff that you're doing, or hopefully bring you on to make themselves better leaders and their team better leaders, how do they reach out to you and get a hold of you?
LinkedIn is good. Ben at valarinconsulting.com. That's VALARIN consulting.com. But LinkedIn, you can find Benjamin Carcich. You can search for Building Better Games. We have a website, buildingbettergames.gg. There's a podcast. There's a Discord server. So you can find that through our website as well. And if you hit me up on any of those channels, even if you just want to chat, honestly, one of the things I realized early, startups tend to have less money to spend on someone like me, and that's okay. I still really enjoy talking with them because I do think that they are where the small pockets can start. That if we are going to push against the trend of just the inefficient bureaucracy eventually taking over everything that works and everything else dying, if we're going to push against it, it's going to start there. The giant organizations, the organizational inertia, I'm not saying it can't be changed. I don't know how to change it. And I'm not alone in that. So yeah. So if you just want to chat, happy to chat. So yeah, reach out, buildingbettergames.gg, Benjamin Carcich on LinkedIn.
Thanks again for being on.
Thanks for having me.
To chat and catch up with you, man.
Yeah. Oh, likewise. It's always good to chat.
Thanks for listening to the entire episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends or anyone you think could benefit from it, and leave us a positive rating or subscribe. This episode was edited by Christopher Delano, music by Jake Hall, who's available for composer work in games. And if you're interested in learning more about the Game Founders support community, go to gamefounders.org or email me at carl@gamefounders.org. Thanks so much.